In the run-up to the hunger strikes, Heaney came under considerable pressure to give voice to a collective moral outrage in the Northern nationalist community and in Ireland. He faced accusations of evasion and moral treason, most notably from Sinn Féin after 1979. When he was en route by train to or from Belfast, we're not sure which, one of their spokesmen, Danny Morrison, entered the train carriage Heaney was in and confronted him about his failure to condemn the treatment of Republican prisoners in Long Kesh. Heaney's reply was that if he wrote something, it would not be at someone else's bidding, but that he was already engaged on his own campaign. On the 8th of March, in 1981, he gave an interview to the Chicago Literary Review just 3 days after the New York Review of Books publication of Miłosz's Nobel lecture. And this date was 7 days after the second wave of the hunger strikes began. This is the one with Bobby Sands, in which 10 hunger strikers starved themselves to death. Heaney argued at this point in the Chicago Literary Review article that poets should always avoid aligning themselves with any one single political position, since, quote, the artist, once he surrenders his authority to a doctrine or a side or to propaganda, has lost something he can never regain. Now, in his next volume, Station Island from 1984, there's only one overt reference to the hunger strikes, section 9 of the title sequence, but throughout the collection, there are countless allusions to prisons, cells, compounds, policemen, punishment, informers, betrayals, and acts of violence. So in a sense, some of the things he's recording in Station Island also have a link with events in Poland. In his recent collection of interviews, Stepping Stones, edited by Dennis O'Driscoll, he talks about one of his neighbours, Francis Hughes, and this is what he writes. Francis Hughes was I think the second of the hunger strikers to die. Francis Hughes was a neighbour's child, yes, but he was also a hitman, and his Protestant neighbours would have considered him involved in something like a war of genocide against them, rather than a war of liberation. At that stage, the IRA's self-image as liberators didn't work much magic with me, but neither did the too brutal simplicity of Margaret Thatcher's "a crime is a crime is a crime." She was saying this in order to emphasise why the IRA should be wearing prison uniforms, because they were criminals. And Heaney writes, my own mantra in those days was the remark by Miłosz that I quote in the poem Away From It All. I was stretched between contemplation of a motionless point and the command to participate actively in history. I want to move on to one of the poems that Heaney wrote about Miłosz in Station Island. And by the time he wrote this, I think he probably met Miłosz for the first time in the company of Robert Hass and Robert Pinsky. So I just want to read through this poem. I'll finish with reading through this poem and talking a little bit about it and what it reveals of Heaney's attitude toward Miłosz in the early 1980s, an attitude that's continued. And you can see the way in which he's still deeply responsive to Miłosz's work in his latest collection, Human Chain. So this is the master from Station Island. He dwelt in himself like a rook in an unroofed tower. To get close, I had to maintain a climb up deserted ramparts and not flinch, not raise an eye, to search for an eye on the watch from his coign of seclusion. Each character blocked on parchment secure in its volume and measure, each maxim given its space. Like quarrymen's hammers and wedges proofed by intransigent service, like coping stones where you rest in the balm of the wellspring. How flimsy I felt, climbing down the unrailed stairs on the wall, hearing the purpose and venture in a wing flap above me. Now, the poet's solitariness is established from the outset of this poem, though the use of the preposition in rather than by conveys a sense of the master's self-sufficiency and hints at his considerable inner resources. The three references to military architecture in lines 2, 4 and 7 carry a range of connotations. The tower is a symbol of strength and endurance, as it was for Yeats, a fitting emblem for the poet himself. The fact that it is unroofed suggests its exposure to the elements and alludes perhaps to the disintegration of European civilization in World War II, the subject of Miłosz's 5th Norton lecture. The fact that the tower's ramparts are deserted might imply that its owner is unconcerned about possible attack though from his coign of vantage he maintains a wary eye. That focus on watchfulness takes us back to the opening simile, comparing the master to a rook, a rara avis, endowed with panoramic vision. The bird motif features in Miłosz's own depictions of the poet as seer, quote, the one who flies above the earth and looks at it from above, but at the same time sees every detail. But it's also linked, in Heaney's mind, to his own Sweeney persona. He's writing at this time a translation of the Sweeney legend, in which we have this kind of bird king. The curse is placed upon him. He's a king who's turned into a bird, and he flies over Ireland. Now, the accumulation of self-reflexive references in the middle stanza points to the poem's subject being a literary master, one whose compositions are both writerly and accessible, since they draw on Christian humanist tradition. Like the master depicted in Miłosz's Mars self-portrait, Heaney's textmaker is utterly in command of his instruments, words. But if uplift is the dominant quality associated with the former's creation, then weightiness and solidity are the hallmarks of the latter's blocked, secure artefacts. So back to Jerzy shoes and feet on the ground. Towards the close, seemingly contrary attributes of the art and artist are juxtaposed. On the one hand, there's the rugged strength and unyielding commitment. On the other is the image of a stone seat beside the balm of wellspring, a sense of originary serenity and refreshment. So overwhelming is the encounter that the narrator, as he descends the tower's unrailed stairs, is left feeling tremulous and fragile. The distance between the two is underscored in the final lines, which stress the master's resolve and enterprise, his wing flap a sign of his immediate departure on a new imaginative flight. So I want to end by making one last kind of connection between the two poets. In both poets, there's a very strong sense of the importance of the poetry as bearing witness. And that Miłosz wrote, this is a quotation from Bogdana Carpenter and Madeleine Levine, who talk about the way in which Miłosz believes, quote, everyone who survives in his memory has a claim on his pen. Interestingly, in the Nobel speech, he mentions the names of two friends, Władysław Sabila and Lech Piwovar, who were both victims of the Katyn massacre, murdered on orders of Stalin, the accomplices of Hitler. And in the last poem that I put on the handout, it's a poem from his latest collection, Route 110, and there's similarly this sense of responsibility that Heaney feels as an artist to the people who've perished in the Northern Ireland Troubles. And he refers specifically in this poem to Mr. Lavery, a man who owned a pub a few houses down from where he was living at the time in 1971, who was blown up in his own pub trying to carry a bomb out. And then also a friend who he went fishing with, Louis O'Neill, who was in the wrong place during a curfew called by the IRA after the shootings in Derry on Bloody Sunday. And he compares these two names, these victims, whose names have kind of passed into oblivion, passed into erasure, with the way in which the Republican prisoners, if you look at the last stanza, the Republican prisoners are commemorated yearly, fired on over anniversaries by units drilled and spruce and unreconciled. Thank you.